Over 30 years have passed since the original Blade Runner was released in theaters. Released to critics butchering its depressing, dismal themes and being a complete box office bomb, the film painted a bleak picture of the future of 2019 that nowadays can hit a little too close to home. Despite what the public at the time felt about the film, what has come since then after it shows it as one of the most defining films of the cyberpunk genre and a masterpiece of cinema. The dark, dystopian landscapes, governed by corporations and harsh hands who only see people as resources, there's undeniably a beauty in the horror of what could have been and honestly could still be. The impact of the film still ripples through entertainment, and games are not left out of that equation at all. Shadowrun, Cyberpunk 2020, and Red, multiple tabletop games can look back at Blade Runner for inspiration to even where they are right now. Those games do fulfill the dark future itch, from either the fantasy-charged techno heists or full-on wars against corporations constantly strangling the population more and more. But I'm not talking about those here. I'm talking about a release that is just on the horizon, which is the Blade Runner RPG itself. The Blade Runner RPG is set in the year of 2037, 1 year after the reintegration of replicants, following the repeal of what is this universe's prohibition. For those who do not know the background of Blade Runner, don't worry. The book's first chapter, less than 10 pages of art and lore, informs you immediately about the world. This is very concise, and there is very little that can be called fluff. The bulk of the game's lore all can be now found after the section of combat mechanics, and takes up most of the last 100 to 125 pages. This is sweet, because that means things are not front-loaded, nor confusing or in weird places. A lot of thought was put into where things would fit and go around here. And, for the sake of this rundown, a replicant is a bioengineered humanoid android, created to be sterile adults for a workforce to aid in human expansion to other worlds and other heavy physical labor. And if you don't know what a human is, I unfortunately don't have a translator handy to cover that conversation. Sorry. Now, in this game, you play the part of Blade Runners working for the LAPD. A Blade Runner is wonderfully defined by the New American Dictionary, copyright 2037 by the way, on page 8 of the core rulebook. Your job is defined as working to suppress all uses of replicant technologies, retire any replicant within Earth's borders upon positive identification, alongside monitoring and apprehending any humans who may aid fugitive replicants. Your job initially was only to detect and retire. Now, you face a more broad world with the repeal of prohibition, alongside your new Nexus 9 replicant service models within the LAPD. The different sides of the coin of this game hopefully are already getting laid out here as I give you this little bit of lore. You can take some time here to read the views coming from both established human Blade Runners and the new Nexus 9 replicant Blade Runners. The underlying tension is palpable, even before you begin making your character, which is what we'll be getting into here now. Right off the bat, Blade Runner does what I love. Page 26, right before anything involving choices of what you can be, is the direct way to make your player character. Step by step, in a simple list. Boom, this is how you do it. Even down to if you're a human or a replicant is a choice with weight behind it. Replicants are physically more capable, getting a bump to their strength or agility, but are more mentally unstable, resulting in less points in a stat called Resolve. I'll cover stats later, don't worry, but one thing I'll say outright, I love that here is a chance that, if you'd like to, you can let your game runner know that you'd like them to roll to determine if you're secretly a replicant yourself. Yes, this is a direct callback to the original Blade Runner movie, which, to this day, the discussion if Deckard is a replicant or not still continues, and was even hinted to in 2049. I love this, as later if you do find out you are a replicant secretly, you are granted the stat changes of a replicant on the spot. Humans have the luxury of also being able to start later in their career in the LAPD, which comes with extra points and skills and some more income, something replicants cannot do, as all replicants have only been on the force for 1 year, making them all rookies. Starting off, the way to understand this game's main setup is it's based upon 4 skill and stat levels. Those are defined as simply A through D. D is essentially being weak, untrained, or incapable, while A is being elite and extraordinary. Average is C, for reference too, so don't think everything has to be B or A to survive. Now, the 4-rank system here is something that makes this game a gem to play, as it's really as simply as what the letter is, and that is what determines your dice roll. D is a D6, C is a D8, B is a D10, and A is a D12. When you're rolling for something, you either roll plainly off a stat or a combination of your stat and skill. So let's say you're at a C for a stat but an A for the skill. You'd roll both a D8 and a D12. A success is determined simply by a roll of 6 or higher on the dice. You only need one success, but the more the merrier. And of course, the higher your dice that you roll, then the more chance for success. You may also push a roll, which lets you re-roll the base dice, but then it's for keeps after that. And yes, ones are critical failures and come with their own problems. But that is indeed the system in and of itself. You have 4 tiers of rank for your stats and skills, they govern what dice you roll, and you either roll 1 or 2 dice depending on what you're doing in an attempt to get 6 or higher. Straightforward, clean, and simple. I dig it a lot compared to more crunchier games. You have a lot of freedom to choose where you want your increases to go for stats, governed by your years on the force, but if you have key skills and stats linked to your chosen archetype, they must be above C rank. At the end of it all, you'll determine your health and resolve, both of which represent how much physical and mental stress you can handle. Replicants get 2 more added to their health side of things, but lose 2 resolve as stated before due to their instability. Losing your resolve is not something you want to have happen, just for the record, but I'm gonna not spoil everything here if I can help it. While either can be most archetypes, there are indeed 3 restricted roles to keep in mind. A replicant can be a doxy, which is a replicant that can essentially read you better than you can read that newspaper in your hand, and then perfectly project what you'd want from them with their own posture. Imagine a behavioral arts expert that can detect your body temperature changing or your pattern of breathing shift and then determine the best way to use it against you to manipulate you. Scary stuff. As for humans, they can be a city speaker, a streetwise talker that knows the pulse of LA, or a skimmer, which, let's just say, is that grimy sleazeball of an old corrupt cop you'd expect it to be. You can roll for your archetype, or select them yourself. Each archetype comes with a key attribute and key skills, as well as how much of their salary is defined by a role. There are multiple solid choices. When I first looked in on the game and saw at launch you could only be in the LAPD, I hesitated until I realized how many options there actually were. Analysts, inspectors, enforcers, even fixer, which is described as a career politician. Thing is too, you can essentially make your own archetype. Even these that are presented as examples are guidelines themselves, giving you much more freedom and starting choice. Just because these are what are listed doesn't mean these are what you're locked into. Another thing your archetype governs is your starting Chinyen points, which are what determines your wealth in the game and is used as such. One thing to note too, yes, in this universe there is indeed synthetic augmentation. Everything from basic plastic surgery all the way up to ocular and synaptic implants which you can obtain. Gearing up in Blade Runner is something that surprised me, as I'm used to many games where you just always go for the loot. Gear is not the focus at all in Blade Runner, as you are geared directly by the LAPD, with exactly what you need to get the job done. You have a base set of standard issue gear, which you see right on page 35, for free. If you lose it, you may be liable and face disciplinary actions. Specialized gear, you do have to request it and essentially put your neck out there and basically roll to see if you get what you need. You may spend these Chinyen points in some of these exchanges, which is better instead of just doling out exact cash and keeping an eye on your balance. Specialized gear is defined as the case file needs, and at the end, you must return it. If you keep it for longer, you got the chance for more disciplinary action. You get your badge, your KIA, which is essentially a retro smartphone linked to the LAPD mainframe, a detective special spinner, which is a flying car for the record and really cool, and one of 2 handguns used by Blade Runners, the PKD or the 357 subcompact. The shift of focus away from loot and stats and instead focus on the story itself is something that appeals to me in a big way, as I've always been a fan of narrative over numbers. The book also lists other specialized equipment, like a Voight Comp machine and an Esper, but truly it comes down to what you need and how you can pull strings to get it. You also have all of the LAPD HQ at your disposal, including the crime labs and CSI side of things, and you can even use these in your cases. Gear is not that big of an issue. Keeping on the right path, though, is. Now, the reason I say that is because it's time to lay out how this game works. I've covered the main things of making a character and other small things, but as for how this game plays, I'll put it straight. You'll find the most out about this in Chapter 7 on page 168, which is Standard Procedure. This game is an investigative race against time to stop a threat, with the potential for catastrophe. Each adventure is defined as a case file. I've mentioned case files earlier in some spots, but what they are essentially is when a replicant or another issue may occur, and you're assigned to the case, and from that moment, you're on the clock. From that very first shift, time is passing, and a countdown is actively going on. You have 4 shifts in a day, and 3 must be spent for work before you must take some downtime. Downtime can be anything from resting at home to going out to the bar with a friend, and each day that you've not cornered down the replicant you're on the tail of, things happen. That replicant could potentially get away, or worse, cause an even worse outcome such as exposure that replicants can indeed break. Huh, I didn't mention that now, did I? It's your duty to make sure that situations like these stay as quiet as possible. Many things ride on things being kept quiet, that replicants can indeed go off baseline and break, that your job in life come down to making sure that illusion is maintained. The countdown itself is defined by each case file, and each shift that can go by can have something new occur. And yes, there are actually chances where you can wind up in the right place simply at the right time and catch them clean. Or you could always be one step behind, struggling to find any information, and just always being there just a bit too late. Witnesses, physical evidence, anything you can find will push you towards an inevitable outcome, or a hit squad sent for your head to clean up the mess that you've made. Now you're sitting and wondering how you can cover so much stuff and cover so much ground, to check so many locations or even do research at the LAPD, because anytime you travel in-game, it takes a shift and you spend that whole shift at the new location. That's because Blade Runner encourages team splitting. This is the weirdest thing to me, as every tabletop game I've played in the past and ran always have had that wonderful golden rule of never split the party. Well, this one recommends it. And it's weird, and I like it. You keep in real-time contact thanks to your KIAs, you cover more ground, and efficiently use what resources you have by sending data, evidence, pictures, you name it through the devices. Split your party. It helps. Never thought I'd say that. Knowing where you'll be working, what you'll be doing, and operating like a well-oiled machine, it will, well, work you towards that final, potential retirement and a closed case. The chase itself, though, the combat. I'm gonna say outright, before I go into the combat itself, I love this game's initiative system. You don't roll for initiative, you draw it. It's based upon cards, and you can just simply use a normal deck of cards. Ace counts as 1 and is the highest card, and you just go down from there. You can do this initiative one of 2 ways. You can keep this order, or you can actually return all the cards at the end of the initiative order to the game runner, and then they just shuffle and re-deal cards. You can even swing this one more way by having all players keeping their cards face down, and the game runner just calls 1, and if anybody has 1, they flip it face up and takes their turn. Call me silly, but I kinda like having some variation to initiative like this as part of the base game. It's fun, and adds some elements of chaos if that's how the players want to go. Combat itself is straightforward. On your turn, you have just 1 action and 1 move. You do have free actions such as standing, dropping prone, taking cover, grabbing something, or shouting, and they're all doable on your turn as much as you want to, but just on your turn. They don't have their own economy, which is nice, nor do they get in the way of things like standing up taking half your movement. It's good knowing that's not a thing. Actions for combat are pretty well defined and have a related skill that you'll be rolling for. Just like with normal skill rolls, you'll be rolling your stat and skill that is relevant together. So, here comes the fun part. Combat is opposing roles. Yep, you're in a roll-off when in combat with your target. This takes it a step up even more when you're in close quarters too. When you're fighting someone face-to-face, if you do not roll a success, but they do, they hit you. Yeah, if you swing at someone but don't succeed, they will break your jaw. So combat itself is very dangerous. I won't go into what happens when criticals come into play beyond the fact that the injuries you can take affect your rolls further on in the game. You can recover slowly thanks to the passage of time, but remember, time is precious. Combat goes beyond just person to person. You can even get into battles on the ground in vehicles or even in the air with spinners, which are definitely able to pack some serious firepower. One more thing in combat I'll touch on is chases. If your target or you move off of the map, a chase begins. What goes down then is a series of rounds in which the player can do maneuvers. This goes beyond just point and shoot. You'll be struggling to keep up to your target or keep away from your target, trying to keep in and out of range, attempting to cut them off. You'll be in a genuine chase if you or your prey get out of sight. Sometimes it is best to just take the shot, but you never know what kind of obstacle may get in the way if you try. All in all, Blade Runner's focus is not entirely just on combat and action. The draw of it in my eyes is the focus on investigative, suspenseful, but grounded gameplay. While I've covered all this, the true balance of what you can do in this game comes down to two kinds of progression points: promotion and humanity. You earn promotion points for doing your job like the good little cog in the wheel you are, but lose out on your humanity. Humanity is gained by kindness and compassion, but you then risk your career. Focusing on the mechanics is one thing, but the spirit of this game comes down to moral choice. Replicants, despite what they're supposed to be, are not what they may seem to be. Some indeed are just scared, hurt, or lost. More human than human was once said about them, and in all facts, this is pretty true. Yet, you are a Blade Runner in a world they cannot be allowed to know to the extent of how far they may have developed on their own. You're there to do your job, to pull the trigger and hide all the destabilizing truth that may threaten society. Or are you? Are you going to, after the course of your investigation in the case file, feel pity? Are you going to sympathize? Are you going to stop and realize that all this time hunting them down, you're the bad guy? Blade Runner is indeed about the gray. It's about the fact that the truth is indeed smothered by large corporations like Wallace or Tyrell of the past. Will you do your job for that promotion and just move on to your next gig? Or will you show the cold world that you live in that there's still a little bit of hope left in it? And that replicant you just hunted down, well, you must have lost them at that last turn and, well, you don't know where they wound up, do you? I do hope in the future for more additions to this game that don't have you working directly for the LAPD. My main gripe was indeed that you were only a Blade Runner and only working for the LAPD. Not for anything more than wondering what it'd be like to be on the other side, to be a replicant on the run, or be a part of a group that worked to protect fugitives and attempt to smuggle them off of Earth, which, for the record, is known as the Replicant Underground and is an actual faction in the game. Thing is, too, on page 26, right beside the character creation steps, they directly say that more is coming. And with the ability to make your own archetypes anyway with the system to fit my needs, my one real complaint got covered there before I could even make it, which, I won't lie, I got a kick out of. I got to admit, I love how aware they are, and they're already saying everything's gonna get bigger from here on out. I dig that. They're not leaving me hanging. Blade Runner is a game that draws you in even as you read through the core rulebook, and may catch you off guard when you're stuck trying to make a choice. You have the pressure of time, the knowing that if you don't act fast, there's going to be consequences, and then wrap all that up with moral choices you don't even know are coming your way the more you learn about your quarry. It sneaks up on you, and before you know it, you don't know what'll happen when you're that dog that just caught their first car. You'll have no clue what to do. All in all, it's a really good game for those looking for something a little different than what else is out there. It really does live up to its legacy.
It's too bad she won't live. But then again, who does?
Thank you all for watching, and I hope you find yourselves a good table.